Hey everyone. In today's video, we're going to go over the data structure of the Digitakt. We're going to talk about where things are saved, how things are broken down, where you can find them in the settings menu, and just generally how things are organized. So let's jump into it. If you go into your settings menu and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see something called System. Let's look there for a second. Here's the submenu for that, and if we go all the way down to that, we can see Storage. It should look something like this. Now, if you notice, there's RAM and then there's this plus drive. So let's start by talking about the plus drive. Plus drive is the hard drive storage for everything in here. It's kind of like the hard drive on your computer. It's all the folders with the projects on it, all of your samples, all of your sounds, everything goes into the plus drive. Now your RAM, that's going to be for whatever project you have open. Right now, I have the presets open, and I haven't put any new ones in there. So yours should, if you open up your presets, look somewhat similar to this. Now there's a lot less storage in the RAM than there is in the hard drive. I'm going to get more in detail about what RAM is and what the plus drive is and the differences between the two. But I think a nice analogy that I've heard about the difference between RAM and hard drive storage is if you think about your kitchen and cooking, then your refrigerator and pantry with all of your ingredients, all of your supplies, everything is your hard drive. And when you go to make a meal, you're going to take out all the ingredients that you need and leave the ingredients that you don't need in the fridge. And you might take those ingredients out and put them out on the counter. The counter, in this case, is your RAM. You're kind of like setting things up that you are going to use in your project and laying them out on the counter so that way as you're cooking, or in this case making music, you can just grab ingredients as you need them. But the ones you don't need, you can leave in the fridge and just leave it in the plus drive. That's kind of an oversimplification of things, but I think it kind of illustrates it pretty well. So if we look here on the storage, you can see that I have 9 projects going. I only have 68 sounds, 81 samples. Now, the difference between samples and sounds was a little bit confusing to me first. This is another area that I think Elektron has sort of developed their own language. In my mind, coming in as a new Elektron user, I thought of samples and sounds as pretty similar. You know, a sample is just a portion of audio and it has a sound to it. In this case, in Elektron's case, sounds and samples are different. And what I would typically think of something like as a synth preset, Elektron calls a sound. So like if you think of any other synth, a Korg synth or something, it comes with a default setting, and if you go in there and change all the filters or add effects or add different parameters to it to color the sound, then you could save it as a preset. On an Elektron unit like this, you would save it, but not as a preset, but as a sound. That's just something that helped me wrap my brain around it. A sound is a sample with a bunch of parameters layered on top. And I'm going to get into more detail of that too when we start talking about the sound pool and things like that. But basically you have close to 1 gigabyte of storage in your hard drive, and you have close to 64 megabytes of storage on your RAM that's readily usable for each project. So plus drive is kind of at the top of our data structure. That's where everything's stored: projects, samples, sounds. The next sort of holder, the next layer down would be our projects. And if we go to our settings menu and we come up to the top, you can see it's right at the top. And I'm going to click onto that for a second and go to manage projects just so we can look at it. So you can see here, I've got 9 projects going. Presets was the first one. I made a separate project for my first run. I made some funk music, just a whole bunch of different things. Now within each of these projects, you can store 127 samples that you can use. You can have 128 patterns and 128 sounds. I mean, it's just an insane amount of stuff. And all of that, once you load those up, would go on your RAM. Let's look at the presets. So this is the presets project. And this should come with everybody's Digitakt. And there are 32 separate patterns. So I'm going to go to this one, Weird Wear. This is B16. And if we look, we can go through our samples for all of the project. This is for all of the different patterns in this presets pattern, in the presets project. So there's 81 different samples in there. And that's just an example. I mean, they didn't even use a huge number of them. So one thing that I've heard people using projects for a lot, and this is again one of those things of, in my head, when I think of a project, I think of typically like a song or something. But this projects actually could be a much broader sense of things, where I've heard people talking about creating a project that's an entire album, or making your project a set list for the evening. And that way you can have multiple projects going to draw from. And there's certainly enough space if you think of, one pattern as a sort of song, then, you can have 128 songs stored in one project. So project would be the next subfolder down from plus drive. You have your plus drive and then a series of projects. And within a project, we would have the samples, 127 samples available. I don't know why it's not 128, but 128 patterns, and then 128 sounds in your sound pool. And that's within each project. Now the patterns, those are the primary data container for the Digitakt. There are 16 patterns available for each of the 8 banks within each project. So your presets, like the ones that are named here, each of those are separate patterns. So if I go to bank A, pattern 1, that's the subaquatic that comes loaded at the top. That's just one pattern. And another pattern, if I go to bank 2, that's just another pattern. So again, this is one of those things of, in my brain, when I thought of a pattern, I would think of that as one sequence that's running on one track. But within the Elektron world, a pattern is like a collection of sequences and all of the tracks working together. But you can hold up to 8 different sounds, one on each audio track. You can also put all of your trigs and your step data for any of the parameters and the notes or anything, that's contained inside a pattern. And then all of your information for your MIDI tracks too is contained within the pattern folder. Now the sounds, as I said before, the sounds are a sample with effects and with parameters layered on top of it. It's in the sound library. You can have 2,048 saved sounds, which is just huge. I can't imagine that anybody would actually use all those up. But you can import sounds to the pattern, and when you do, it becomes an independent copy of the sound on the plus drive. So you can mangle it and change all its settings, and it won't change the original sound or preset that you saved to the plus drive. And then within each of the patterns, you have 8 audio tracks that can play back samples, and then you have 8 MIDI tracks that cannot play back audio, but can control external devices. So a lot of people get confused that they don't hear sounds when they play the bottom 8 trigs, but those are MIDI. Those would control other gear. And that is an overview of the Digitakt data structure. Plus drive, project, samples, patterns, and sound pool within the project, and then your 8 audio tracks and 8 MIDI tracks within each pattern. So I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Once again, thanks to Perfect Circuit for sponsoring this video series. We really appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.